Hello, this is John Speelman with a roundup of the fifth round of the Altibox Norway tournament in Stavanger. After yesterday's excitement, I thought I'd drawn really a very short straw halfway through today's round, maybe nanometers, but I thought we got up to at least millimeters by the end because there was quite a lot of interest actually, although all the games eventually ended as draws. And even if I haven't really got a game of the day, I've certainly got a move of the day, and it appears in Kramnik against Nakamura. So this was a Sicilian where Kramnik played queen takes d4. And I looked up to see if either of these guys had played this. And I think I found a game where Nakamura had been white and lost to Karjakin in Mexico in 2004, which had gone like this, as games do. Somehow Kramnik had eventually lost. Sorry, Nakamura had eventually lost this game. But I mean, obviously, Kramnik has decided that he didn't feel like taking on Nakamura in a main line, and Nakamura didn't want to play knight c6 either, so he went a6, and they had this. Queen a4. So now at the moment, b5 things get taken because of the pin on the rook, so you can't play b5. So he took bishop d7, take queen takes. So white's got the two bishops here, but he's lost a little bit of time. Black's quite well developed. And they normally play bishop b3, I think, but actually Kramnik played bishop d2, and I'm sure he prepared this some distance. g6, long castles, bishop d7. Obviously can't play bishop h6 because bishop h6 is check now. So bishop g5, queen at g4. Now he played, I mean, he didn't have to go bishop g5, but when he did, he now went takes and went into this position. So positions with opposite bishops are, well, it's well known that in the endgame, positions with opposite bishops are often drawn. But in the middle game, the bishops can't defend the squares which each other attack. This can lead to very sharp play, certainly with mating attacks. But here too, white has some weak pawns. f2, g3, h2 is a little bit weakened, and black has a weakness in b7. And this position is quite complicated, very complicated actually. Anyway, they played some more moves, sort of sensible moves, rook c8, bishop. And is this where Kramnik... No, he didn't repeat yet. I thought he might play h4 here. He didn't. I don't know if you should or not. Hard to tell. He doubled h4, knight b6, and he did this stuff. And I thought he was going to take a draw. But then he found something much more interesting to do. He went knight b6, and he went f4, take, rook h5. Of course, you can't play rook h2 at the moment because of bishop c6 check. And now Kramnik found a really interesting idea, and indeed the move of the day, which was the excellent move rook d7 here. And the idea of this is that if rook takes knight, rook takes pawn, bad things happen on the diagonal. Well, first, if rook c8, bishop takes knight check, and if rook takes, you got rook b8 check, so white wins the piece back with an extra pawn. Knight a5, you can go rook takes e7 with check and bishop takes rook. And if rook c5, you just pin the guy. So if rook c5, you just go here and also win a piece back quite simply. So after rook d7, he couldn't take the knight in a8. I don't know if people know, but I love having my knights and squares like a8. And this, I think this is very aesthetic here. But Nakamura, I imagine he was surprised by this, but he dusted himself off, played rook h2, bishop b4. Now you don't play f5 here, because then takes, if rook takes b7, so you're going to take the pawn. Check king here, and now rook to here with a clear advantage. This is clearly better for white. So you don't want to weaken the sixth pawn, so instead you play rook e2. and Kramnik took, and Nakamura quite rightly took back with the pawn. If he takes with the rook, then rook takes b7 is pretty good for white. And they got to this position. And now, okay, so white's got a very active knight, good rooks, and is going to be able to win something on the queen's side. But his king's side is very badly compromised with a very weak pawn on g3. The more so because black has this black squared bishop. It just means that this pair of pawns are pretty weak. So rook h1, bishop f6. Now if this rook went on e2, you could actually play rook to the 7th, bishop here and knight e6 check, but of course the rook's moving backwards. You can try king d1 here. I don't know if he plays rook e4. He can also go here actually. Takes, takes, takes here. And I believe this should end up as equal. I mean, I didn't really analyse it. An engine said equal, and I thought, well, it looks as though it probably is. I don't know what you play here, whether you play king c1 or rook takes rook and rook d6 or something, but probably everything drops off and you end up with an equal rook ending of some sort. But anyway, you didn't have to allow this as black. In fact, what Kramnik did was he took some pawns, much more human approach. Rook here, knight here, c5. Can put the knight in c2. I guess it's very passive. Knight d3 takes here back. And I'm just going to look. I think there's some funny line here where, oh yeah, instead of playing rook g2, he wanted to go c5 first, knight d3, and then rook g2 first. And if a3, it just wanted to take on c3 and take on here. And basically you have to go king d1. And I think black is going to win all these pawns. I don't know what, while white's getting sorted because the rook's so powerful in the 7th rank. You'll have to play knight c1 at some moment. I mean, that's very, very far from obvious, but I believe that's supposed to be true anyway, according to Houdini. In fact, it doesn't matter which one, does it? Well, what happened was Nakamura, being a human being, took an a2 and went back, and Kramnik took his pawn, rook b8, rook b7, takes, rook b2. And if the white rook were on d1, say here, and he could play rook d3, then he'd have serious chances of getting the advantage. But the only move to avoid losing a pawn, well, there are two things you can do. You can try knight c5 here, actually, because rook takes pawn, there'd be knight e4. And after bishop here, knight here, rook takes pawn, rook d1, at least you're in a position to advance these pawns. I think black plays b5 here, probably. And frankly, I could imagine losing this as white just as much as winning it. So I wouldn't be at all enthusiastic. He defended passively with the rook. Nakamura just played g5. He's just nibbling away at these pawns till he can get his bishop to attack. Takes, I assume that's okay. Bishop, knight, rook, rook. Basically this position, if the white king were on the c4 and the white pawn were on b4, white would probably be winning because he could start pushing his pawns. At least he could have a jolly good try. But as it is, I mean, his positions, well, his king's too bad. If he tries to play b4, then the c3 pawn will be weak. If he plays c4, the b2 pawn will be weak. It just doesn't look as though it's going to be winning. And what in fact happened was Nakamura drove this king out there when rook d2, which stops the knight going back to d3 or indeed to d5, rook g8. He could even have tried e5 here, but in fact he just repeated a few times. And they drew. So I really liked Kramnik's rook d7, but Nakamura kept himself together. Of the other games, I'm going to show you bits of the others. Okay, so now we're going to look at Karjakin and Caruana, and a very interesting piece of opening preparation. Well, very clearly opening preparation. And it was a Petroff. And what happened is that they played this line of the Petroff. Obviously, there's a huge amount of theory. When I was a kid, the Petroff was thought to be a sort of irregular way to play for equality. I mean, obviously, there's nothing like that anymore. And they played their moves. This is at one of the lines. And takes, queen takes. And normally they play b takes c3 here. But Karjakin had very clearly, together with his seconds and his engines, prepared queen takes b7, because it ain't a move that you play unless you know exactly what you're doing. So now queen d7's been played. There was a game which went queen d7, queen takes, knight takes, c5, bishop takes pawn check, knight takes pawn, knight e4. This was a game Svidler Ivanchuk, Morelia Linares 2007, and they drew eventually. I have no idea. I imagine that Karjakin decided he could get plus equals in this position, and maybe even could improve earlier. But clearly, who knows how much Caruana had looked at, but he played knight e4, queen takes, queen back. So you're trapping this queen, but it's not easy to move your knight to take her. Have to play pawn takes pawn. Now, obviously, what happens if you recapture? I hadn't even thought about that. Oh, do you just play rook takes e4 here? What's the score? Presumably you can go rook takes e4 in this position, because you can't go queen d5 because of bishop h2 check. But if you go rook e4, knight c6, queen f8 check, you've got two rooks and a pawn for the queen. So I presume that that is good for white. I hadn't even noticed that earlier. I suppose because he didn't do it, but I think the threat of knight c6 probably forces this. And takes knight c6, queen f8. I could quite imagine that Karjakin was prepared to play that for a win. And pawn takes rook, queen takes pawn. You have two extra pawns, and the knight covers e1. So that after queen takes rook e8, you can just go away, and nothing appalling happens because the square's covered. So none of that happened. Let's revert again. And what actually happened was they played a line that had clearly been analysed with the help of an engine. Knight f6, rook e3, which I think is the only move. Knight takes pawn, rook b3. So now if knight b6, you just take it and you are a pawn up. And the queen's quite safe then. You can go back to a4 if it wants to. So knight b4 is played. Again threatening knight a6. You take it. Bishop b3. Still the moves you have to play. And now if knight a6, you obviously go knight e5, which I hadn't noticed either till I looked now, but now obviously that's completely obvious. So he went bishop d6. So now knight e5, I guess you go queen c7, but he went d5, c5, b4. Got to play pawn takes pawn, and this is about where the analysis ends. White's going to end up a pawn up because he's going to win this a pawn, but this d5 pawn's a bit weak. So glory be unto the engines in the highest. You know, they've analysed this position a very, very long way. Karjakin and his boys, and his silicon. And rook d8 was played, and being a human being, Karjakin took this pawn with the queen. The engine quite like taking with the bishop, though eventually it ends up in a draw ending. I'll show you. Bishop takes, queen a4, queen b7, knight d7, queen a6, queen a2. Take, knight f6, d6. I mean, obviously, knight e8. Now knight g5 is a good move. Obviously, you can't take on d6 at the moment because the queen takes d6. And if rook takes, queen e4 must cause a catastrophe. So you play queen a8, which prepares to play knight takes d6, and the main line seems to go like this. f5, queen b6, rook here. By the way, if you'd played queen b6 before you played h3, then if I just go back a moment, then in this position, queen b6 gets hit by rook c8, which is why you don't do it yet. You have to make Luft first. So h3, f5, queen b6, rook a8. Now the engine says queen a5, as engines do. Queen takes knight d7 is a bad idea, so you take it, pawn takes knight d7, rook d8, rook c8, rook takes pawn. And they could agree a draw, or they could not agree a draw, depending how Karjakin felt. Right, so that's probably a main line after bishop takes a7. What actually happened was he took with the queen, being a human being. As we said, queen takes, bishop takes, knight d7, bishop d4, which covers f6, which is nice, stops knight f6, rook a8. I thought he'd play rook c6 here, but I'm not really right about that. Rook c6, bishop f8, rook c7. For some reason, my little brain discounted knight f6. That's a perfectly good move. After takes, pawn takes, you get to play rook a2. I started looking at this, which is pretty stupid actually, here in b3. And white has several ways to get the advantage, but the simplest one is just to play a4, b2, knight d2. Rook takes pawn, king here, I think, and you can win the knight, but you're going to be a pawn down at the end, a d pawn down, and white can actually do better than that if he makes an effort, I think. Anyway, he played king f1 first to give himself a back rank, or avoid back rank mates. Rook takes pawn at the moment is a pretty bad idea, I think, because of rook b8 check. That's a really bad idea. And in fact, he played rook a5. Sorry, I haven't proved that, but it is true. I think there's some line which is deeply, deeply horrible here. Check. Bishop f8 is, probably knight e5 here is a catastrophe total. And if you go knight f8, what you play here? Can't immediately see it. Sorry, I'd have to use an engine, but there's some reason this is... Perhaps bishop b5 is really unpleasant. I don't know. I'm not at the moment seeing why this is such a disaster. Anyway, he didn't do that. He went rook a5 to attack this pawn, and check, and bishop f8. Knight f8 is a very, very bad idea, because of bishop b6, rook takes pawn, rook d8, which really is almost the end of the game, I think. You're going to win material here. That's just a disaster. So bishop f8 was forced, and d6, rook d5. Actually, he played knight e5, which is completely natural, but actually it looks as though rook d8, rook d6, bishop b3 is a better idea. You're threatening bishop to d2 takes pawn, and black's problem is that if knight f6 you play rook takes bishop with check, bishop d5, and bishop takes b4, with very good chances in the knight ending, even though black's king starts a bit more active. This is very, very unpleasant for black. So actually that was a better chance, I think, though it was very far from obvious. What actually happened was they got to a rook ending. 6 bishop here, king f7. And Karjakin went rook b8. If he goes rook d8, then he can play g5 and he can play f5 and f4. So this doesn't actually work. So he went rook b8, and they went into this archetypical rook ending, where I thought he might go g5 first. I wasn't sure. h4, h5. I'm not sure I mean, I did an endgame lecture recently on which I didn't get around to it. I did include this, but with f7 g6 against f2 g3, and I think it is a draw, as everybody says, but it's not as easy as you think. This is probably quite a good structure for black, actually, because black is ready to play g5 at the right moment. They went round in circles for a while, and I want to, yeah, of course, so after king d1, that set the trap, rook takes f2, 2 question marks, rook f4 check. That would not have been clever by Caruana. King here, rook, king, king. I thought he'd go king f7. He went king. Sorry, I thought he'd go king h6 or king h7 so he could play g5. He went here now. And now I thought that Karjakin would start the big rush to the queen's side. But in fact, it doesn't work. It goes king d1, king e6, king c1, g5, king b1, rook d2. That's a much better square than e2 because then rook f3 would be a threat. And if you go rook b4, as you want to, rook takes pawn, a5. Black has time for rook g3. Basically because if you go rook b3, you can play pawn takes pawn, threatening rook g3 and giving your rook a route back. And if you go a6, rook takes pawn, rook a4, you've got time for rook to b3 to b8. And presumably if king b2, you start giving checks. You do the normal thing here. You can't at the moment go rook d3 because of a7 and rook b8, but you can go check, king b3, rook up. No, you can't go rook up because of a7. You have to give another check, sorry. Check, king a4. Is this all right? I'm confused at the moment. I can't see why this isn't a catastrophe. Oh, can you go... Once he's gone rook a4, you can probably go rook over a7, rook back, rook up, and if he goes rook b3, you go rook c8. And he doesn't have time to make a queen. He can only win queen for rook, which is going to be a draw, presumably, though even that isn't absolutely clear. Okay, we'll believe that. In fact, what happened, I mean, I think that he should have tried this Karjakin. What he actually did was he brought his king back all over here and tried to do something on this side of the board. And basically, it isn't going to work. He did this, and at some moment, he actually even lost his h-pawn, and then they played a few more moves. And it's quite a funny move, isn't it? I don't know if you had to do that. You could have gone rook a5 and king a6. Check, king, rook up. Here, takes, rook. Once you get an f5, there's nothing to be done here. And they went to king against king somehow. So, quite a big battle. Okay, I'm just going to quickly talk about Carsten against Geary as well, since I also looked at that. And that's going to be number one. So this was Carsten. He doesn't seem to have any openings at the moment. I suppose he never has any openings, but he's still playing bishop c4. I suppose he did get the advantage against Wesley So in round one. But this is not what's... I don't know how strategically rich a position this is. I mean, I haven't played it myself. I really don't know. a4. So played bishop e6, and Carsten got some pressure, but eventually they drew. Okay, Carsten, I think, basically believes that because you get in b5 in this position, and taking and playing b5 for black isn't a very good idea at all. Because you get in b5, you at least have something to play with. So he's gone around in circles, but he's persuaded him to take on c4. I said, I haven't played this position myself as either colour, so I really don't know strategically what's going on very much. My feeling is it must be all right for black, but I understand that b5 is progress to some extent. So Carlsen's got what he wants. He's got the queen and b3, he's got the pawn and b5, and he claims that this position with 2 knights each is better for white, but I don't know, it didn't really seem to work out that way at all this time. D5 happened, so that's presumably if you don't play d5 you'll be worse. Takes. No, he didn't take. If he goes pawn takes, knight e5, queen d5, knight f3, queen f3, queen takes pawn, obviously hitting the rook f1, then basically black has a million different ways to get a decent position. One simple move is just queen takes d3 is absolutely fine, I think. And probably you got lots of other ways to play as well. So Carlsen obviously wanted something a bit more meaty than that. So he played knight d2. But actually, I mean, if anybody was getting worse, he was it for a little while. So you play d4 because that's what you're trying to do. Queen d6, giving a rook and the queen a square. Queen b2 takes here. So, well, you'd like to play knight c5, but actually if he does, really bad things start happening. You can go takes, rook a2, queen b1, splat. And I presume that is checkmate, more or less. So, well, it certainly looks like it. I mean, one line goes here, take here. And you have only, no, you only have one checkmate, don't you? G5, because you can play queen takes knight otherwise, but that will do. All right, so he has to go knight back, and black can just take a pawn. Black had a lot of good moves in this position. E4, queen here. C8, D5. I think you can play queen D7, rook B1, rook C5 if you want. If knight B3, you go away, and if the knight goes back, you play rook C5 again. But Geary decided he was going to make a draw, so he took and played queen C7. And so at the moment he's a pawn up, rook B1, and now he played F5 to undermine the centre. And now at least it got quite exciting for a move or so, because Carlsen found a nice tactical move. I must say, I mean, I know Carlsen, you know, he's fighting and it's all very splendid, but it does feel a bit like a blitz game. It feels like the blitz games that he won, in the sense that if this was a blitz game, he'd play queen b4 and the guy would fall over. But given time, Geary plays pawn takes pawn, d6, knight d5, and the tactics happen to be okay for black. So takes, and the problem is rook takes b7, of course. And the problem is that this pawn, if you played pawn takes pawn with check, I think you'd lose, because white would be able to, well, you'd certainly be in danger anyway. Pawn takes pawn with check, king g1. There's a big danger he's going to go knight, well, you have to go play a king move, I wonder. Knight here, threatening knight d6, one of the knight moves, a knight move, a rook move, and now presumably rook to here wins. So obviously you don't do that. I mean, the point of your pawn is to deflect the king. You could play king h7, knight takes pawn. You could just do this if you wanted. Knight takes pawn, knight f4, knight takes pawn, knight e6. Rook here, knight takes pawn, rook here. Black only has one move here, but it's perfectly adequate. Rook to there. And that's the end of that. In fact, he played f2, which is another good move, because it wins a couple of tempi. G3 gives the king a square, but now black has time to get organised. King h7, king g2, knight back, Carlsen had a think, took this, which he did knight c4, you can do it any way you like. And they agreed to draw. So that leaves Nakamura still half a point in the lead, doesn't it? And so this was a bit of a hiatus after the ultra-violence of the previous round, but it's still they're still fighting very hard, and I'm sure there'll be plenty of bloodshed in the rounds to come.